Okay, this is another episode of Thorinquiry, a name I'm going to make stick. I don't care how many people think it's bad. That's my own sort of radical move. And this episode is with Ian Miles Cheong, who is a contributor for dailycaller. Occasionally, you might see him writing for The Sun. That's how you know he actually truly appreciates free speech and thinks you shouldn't judge any publication by, or, you know, all the associated stereotypes, you know. So what's great is you're living through your life exactly the kind of message you want to send here. So for people who don't know you, and because actually one of the funny things about the Gamergate world and social justice, etc., is that it has now given rise again to the journalists no longer being faceless. Like I can tell you from my own history when I used to write about esports stuff before we had personalities and YouTube channels. The reason why you weren't famous is people could have read hundreds of news posts or articles you'd written, but no one ever looks at the little name at the top. You read the article, right? You see the headline, you read the article. So people weren't famous. So one of the reasons that Ian is famous is not just for the work he's doing now, which certainly gets a lot of attention, but because, are you ready? Make sure all children's ears are covered, put away any animals. He used to be a social justice warrior. Holy shit. So that's exactly why I wanted to do an interview with you, Ian, as well as the fact that since then you've gone very much in the other direction. So I think you get you have a very good sense of what both worlds are like, but particularly because, and this might sound like a terrible way to phrase it, but I like evocative imagery, you know? It's almost like we caught one in the wild. Like, no one's ever been able to talk to a live social justice warrior in a real way before. Because you notice, if you've ever seen, they don't talk to people who they don't agree with.
They use block lists.
They know platform, they won't reply. If you ever see them on a talk show, it always has to be essentially just like their opinions being shared. They'll never kind of answer questions. You can never get through to someone and just have a conversation with them, you know. So that's one of the reasons why I was quite interested. And for people who want a little bit more backstory, you did an interview with a friend of mine, Richard Lewis, which you'll find on his YouTube channel, which goes into some of these issues. But I think I have kind of a different take to go on it. So what I want to start with is this. So what I've heard when you talked in the past about how you became essentially a social justice warrior, because your route to doing it was kind of like, it's through what you do. It's through journalism and stuff, you know. You notice a lot of people get through it this way. I mean, some people amazingly get to it through video game reviews, which I've never really understood. Like, I've never understood myself how video game reviewer became some kind of political statement. Yeah. I just guess that it's a very boring job that people don't feel satisfied in, you know. So you got through it through journalism, because obviously you write articles, you put things out there. And one of the key aspects that I've heard you describe was the fact that because you were actually friends with Zoe Quinn, who obviously is a central figure within the whole Gamergate scandal and all ensuing drama since then. She, you know, somehow she's the queen at the center of the spider web in some way. You know, everything leads back to her in some way. So I understand the logic. Okay, that because you were friends with her and you saw. Listen, people did attack her, some people, and you wanted to defend her. And then you've described how it became then kind of that classic us versus them mentality, you know. It wasn't just like, these are some people attacking her. It was like, right, well, these are some people, and they seem to represent another side, which obviously in this case was Gamergate. And the person who's my friend is being attacked, and, you know, regardless of any other aspect, she's being attacked, therefore I'm on her side, and, you know, it became this us versus them thing. So my question would be this. When you look back now, one thing I actually hate in life in general is people who have like partisan behavior. Like I actually hate that mentality of like us versus them. Because put it this way, I'm the sort of person where even if you got together 10 people who share some of my opinions, there's no way I would be like, well, we're not a team. You know, I'm sure I disagree on lots of other things.
It's a hive mind.
Yeah, just because we agree on a few things, like we definitely do not represent each other and do not ever say that. So here's the part that's weird, is people on the Gamergate side play into the same exact like dichotomy and the same kind of represent. Because what they'll always say, which I never understood, is because they can actually prove that some of those threats made against people like Zoe Quinn and people like Brianna Wu were fake, or were just blatant trolls, you know, like an egg with like one follower who's obviously just being created to make that one tweet, and therefore it's not really, as the FBI would tell you, a credible threat against the person's life, you know, that person's never going to find them or kill them, etc. Right? We can all acknowledge that. And when you point that out, that is a very good point to point out that there wasn't this widespread level of hate and criticism that those particular individuals pretended there was. You know, they made it seem like everyone who likes Gamergate or games and is against corruption in journalism attacked them and said, I'll kill you and I'll rape you.
Attack the women.
Yes, exactly. But one thing I wanted to ask you is this. I know from my own experiences within the very sheltered little world of esports that I know similar types of people who are in a position like you. Okay, so for example, they're women who work as journalists or they're women who work in gaming, but they don't buy into the social justice ideology of like, you know, everyone just abuses me and attacks me and I'm held down, etc. But I will say some of them have shown me, you know, the worst of the messages that they'll sometimes get. And I will absolutely tell you right now, I've been on the internet a long time. I've had people say a lot of stupid things to me. A lot of people didn't like me. I've never had anything as extreme as some of the messages they've gotten, you know. Like, they've had messages that were like, you know, detailed stories of how this person's going to find them and then all these things are going to, like, just ridiculous level that the people
sexual threats, usually.
Was it like this with the attacks on people like Zoe Quinn and people like this who yes, they've tried to make it sound like a million people did it, but were there really terrible things happening to them at this time?
I would say that to Zoe Quinn, there were some like that, maybe a handful of people, but definitely not on the scale that she says it is. And that's just her, right? With Anita Sarkeesian, same thing, right? There were detailed threats towards her, but not so much with the other women. Like, for instance, Brianna Wu, you brought her up. There were never any threats like that because from what we understand now is that she may have manufactured those threats for herself, towards herself, right? She was caught doing that on Steam when she logged into her developer account, forgot to log out, and posted a threat against herself. That was a thing that happened. And because of that, she went into the spotlight, and now she's running for Congress, and she's riding on this whole bandwagon of Gamergate hate and all this nonsense. And there were other women as well, women who were not well known at all. No one cared who they were. And they were manufacturing threats against themselves, or they would, you know, they would get random threats as women are prone to do on the internet when they speak up. And they would blow it out of proportion and try to fit into the whole Gamergate thing. So the game journalists, you know, seizing upon this this opportunity, I suppose, because there was a long, it was a mentality that gamers are entitled, that gamers are spoiled crybabies who, for many years, this is what game journalists were doing, right? They were writing about this, and finally, they had the opportunity to say, "Hey, we can put a name to this. Let's call it something." And sure enough, the name was already there, right? Because Adam Baldwin had coined Gamergate, so they were like Gamergaters, right? Yes. And they used that to basically smear every single gamer with that broad stroke of paint or whatever it is. Pretty nasty. So while there were threats against Zoe Quinn, I would say that it was relegated to a very small group of people. And I myself received a lot of threats. I mean, there was a guy who actually came to Malaysia, where I live, and tried to stalk me. No one talks about that. It's always about the women in games journalism or women in gaming. But it really was, it was a group of two people. It wasn't so much women. This whole idea that it's Gamergate's a movement against women is itself nonsense. Because there are many women on the pro Gamergate side as well who didn't like the unethical journalism that was going on. And I mean, if you don't mind, I can get into a little bit of history without going into it too much. Yeah. So the reason Gamergate started wasn't because of the Zoe post, right? I mean, that was part of it. What really happened was the journalists had a tendency to give favors to their friends, give coverage of games that were terrible and bad, and they would say positive things about these games, and anyone calling it out would be smeared as an entitled crybaby or harasser or something. That was an ongoing problem. They just didn't have a name for it. And then when the Zoe post, if you don't know what that is, that was when Aaron Gioni, he is the ex-boyfriend of Zoe Quinn, wrote a long post detailing how she was cheating on him with 5 different guys. That went viral, and people were talking about that on various forums, on Reddit, on GameSpot, on NeoGAF, and everywhere else, just as anyone is prone to talk about anything. People talk about Charlottesville yesterday, right? That's a thing that people are talking about. Unfortunately, with this issue, the moderators of all these websites decided to censor them. And in addition to the censorship, gaming websites came out against gamers. And instead of saying, hey, maybe don't harass Zoe Quinn, they didn't even mention her, Zoe by name. What they did was write an article about how all gamers are dead and or how gamers are over. And in doing so...
As an identity, you know, as a group of people, yes.
Right, as a group of people, right. And they said that the gamer identity is over, and in the original article was by Lee Alexander on Gamasutra. It had a variety of slurs aimed towards gamers. So people reading it felt really upset. And when they tried to express how upset they were banned or censored. So that's when Mundane Matt and Internet Aristocrat, or Mr. Medicare, as you might know him right now, made a video or videos about this issue, and Adam Baldwin tweeted out #Gamergate because it's a pretty catchy title. So people started adopting it. They wanted a place to talk about it, and Twitter was the best place to go because they were censored everywhere else. And the media doubled down on its narrative about Gamergate. They said it was a harassment of, a movement of harassers against women in the game industry. Because, again, they didn't want to mention Zoe Quinn by name. So they made this broad claim that it was about how all gamers hate all women. And that's how it escalated.
Sure. So, okay, yeah, so just hop back into that then. Something you brought up there, which I thought is, then again, something that, okay, you'd think with Gamergate being this big, it is almost like this moment in history which ripples before it. You can see what builds up to it, and obviously absolutely it looms still. We can see the shadow of it across what happens now, because it's something that we all refer back to. It's this touching point, where you can refer so many things back to it, but people very rarely ever actually deconstruct the origins of it. Like something you were talking about there, okay, when this guy Aaron posted essentially what he did was he did kind of like a tell-all. He said everything about his relationship with this person, Zoe Quinn, who he claimed had cheated on him, and he posted all these logs of the conversations they had. And within that, as sort of, it didn't even seem like it was the central point he was driving home. His central point really just seemed like, I'm a spurned lover who's really upset at the person who I feel betrayed by. Therefore, I'm going to hurt them by publicly revealing kind of, their indecencies and things that they've done wrong. And that's clearly some of his motivation for putting the log out. And then what happened was within that, yes, it contained details, which if someone kind of put them together in their brain showed, wait a minute. So she also might have slept with these people who are games reviewers, who also might have in some way helped with her career because she's a game developer and maybe even reviewed her game. That was kind of like the unspoken aspect. Like the pieces were all there and other people had to put them together. So here's the part it's actually always surprised me about that story is, okay, here's what's funny. That is one of the first things I heard about Gamergate was about this exact post, okay, when it was first happening a couple of years ago. I think it was late 2014, right? So when it was happening, I heard about that. And like as usual, I don't tend to read other people's kind of commentary on stuff initially. I want to read the first thing myself and make my own decision up, okay? And funny thing is, when I first read that, I actually didn't understand the part about the reviewing aspects. I didn't know that much about games journalism in the modern day. I haven't read games magazines for a long time. I'm in esports, where you just pick like 2 games, and just play those forever. So here's the funny thing.
Is irrelevant. Yeah.
Exactly. It didn't matter to me anymore. So when I heard that story, though, what's funny is my initial reaction was, wow, what a piece of shit this Aaron guy is. So he just revealed like a load of private logs about, his girlfriend, like messaging him stuff. Like I'm actually as a person, I'm very against the idea of revealing things that someone said without knowing it'll ever be public, because I think as you see around the world, we all know we have a private life and a public life, and you could catch anyone. If you could get enough of their private life, everyone would be fucked, because the social rules we have to live by in the public world are very different. So here's the question for you. Why again do people seem to take a partisan issue on that? Like here's my question, okay. Was it reasonable for him to put out the logs, etc., in as much as it did kind of like whistleblow to some degree the corruption? Because I'm not that's the part I'm not entirely convinced he was necessarily trying to do. Or do you think it actually is kind of fucked up ethically, in your opinion, to put out like private logs out? What's your take on that?
I wouldn't do it personally. It's generally a bad thing to do, to take someone's trust in you and put it out there. But I feel like he felt justified in doing so because she had kind of done the same thing to him by cheating on him with multiple different people, right? Sure. So I feel like he felt justified. Like I wouldn't do it personally, but I understand why he did it.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah, so, because if you read the contents of the log, like when I first read it, my initial reaction was the same as yours. Like, how dare he leak these logs because they're private? But my second reaction after reading it completely was, well, she's kind of a bad person. But because at the time she was my friend, and I saw that some people were calling her a slut, attacking her, people who didn't know who she was, who were perhaps not as close to her as I was. I felt like it was unfair for a lot of people to judge her like that. So I jumped to her defense. And then things escalated. Yeah.
So, okay, this might sound like a very weird question, because I've noticed as a trend among young people, because young people in general are quite apathetic, like they don't really have it. I mean, it's funny, obviously the topics of social justice are an example of where they do have a movement they follow or something they claim to believe in, you know, but in general, because young people tend to be fairly kind of like just drifting between things they're interested in, a lot of young people who are smart actually will say about topics like social justice and stuff, oh, don't worry, come on, they don't really believe that, you know, they just know, like, you know, it's politically expedient to say it, or, you know, as we've seen sometimes, they want power, or they want well, we could imagine someone wanting to raise a lot of money and then just keep the money, or we could imagine, you know, someone running for some sort of political status, you know, on the back of this movement, right? Those could be interpreted very cynically. So my question to you is, knowing some of the central people at the heart of this, beyond what they might have done on a cynical end, are they actually genuine about these things? Do you think on a deep down level, if you could get to them, I don't know, with some sort of mad shamanistic ayahuasca experience where they, you know, all their ego fell away and they just really explained, you know, from their heart, do they actually really believe these things, that they live in an oppressed society and that they are hated by everyone and that they really are these like you know, freedom fighters? That's how they think of themselves. Do they really believe that? Do you think is there cynicism mixed in?
I believe they believe that they have to have these ideas, because if they don't, then their whole worldview falls apart. Because at one point they may not have believed the things that they do right now, right? But now they do, because their entire worldview hinges upon it. They have dedicated so much of their time, their lives, and perhaps seeing other people believe it, that they have become consumed by their belief. If that makes any sense. I mean, it sounds very contradictory, right? That they didn't believe it originally, and that they may have done it for politically expedient reasons or any number of other reasons, but now they do, because it's the only worldview that they have left. Because if they stop believing what they believe, then their whole worldview falls apart and they don't know who they are anymore, because their identities hinge upon it. So I think it is genuine now. It wasn't always, but it is now. Because if the idea here is like, it's kind of like religion, right? Because if you stop believing, and you see other people believing and exhibiting those beliefs, then you're going to question them as well. You're going to wonder, do they believe the same things I did? Are they faking? There's no way they can be faking. There's no way all of us can be caught up in a delusion. So it's easy and it's lazy. So they all choose to believe. Like, I think that it may be possible to wake them up, but I don't think they want to be woken up from their slumber. There's just no way at this point, because it would mean the whole world, everything that they know, comes crashing down upon them. And that's the reason why they will martyr themselves. They'd rather die for their beliefs, no matter how ridiculous, than actually embrace reality. It's a reason why you have people throwing themselves on the rocks. The instant someone accuses them of doing something bad, they won't even defend themselves anymore. Yeah. It could be something as simple as flirting with someone and then being claimed that they are sexual harassers. They, instead of defending themselves and saying, oh, hey, it was mutual, they will instead say, I'm sorry. Yes. Why are you apologizing for this? You're ruining yourself, but they'll do it anyway. They have to, even if it kills them.
So while, as we kind of referred to before, a lot of these people refuse, for example, to engage with anyone who, it's not even just people who have opposing or differing opinions, it's just anyone who doesn't have their exact opinion almost, you know. They no platform, they won't engage in online debates. If they do, it's Twitter and it's just a half a sentence, you know, it's not a real debate in any way. You can't exchange ideas. When you have them privately, because you were not only just friends with these people, but for anyone who doesn't know, you were around in the days when they had this crash override network where they had little, like, kind of a niche group of people who, I mean, the claim was, you know, that we were going to stop harassment online, etc. But obviously when the leaks from the logs of that chat came out, we saw it was essentially just a bunch of people bitching about other people and then in some very loose way perhaps plotting to do things that sound a lot like harassment to those people. But okay, if you were on the inside of this kind of like inner circle, if you talked to one of these people one-on-one, because obviously, listen, it doesn't matter what group you're with. Like, even if I'm with my friends, okay, yeah, I'd say all of my friends in real life, you know, are cool people, etc. But if there's me, another friend, and then a third friend, because we've now got a group, I will definitely behave differently in front of those two people than I would with each of them one-on-one. Like, I can be a little bit more open, a little bit more honest each with those ones, because there's that kind of a sense that, like, it's safer to talk it. When you talked to some of these people one-on-one, did any of them really have pure conviction? Did any of them sometimes have doubts and kind of be realistic?
I think, okay, so when I was in a one-on-one conversation with these people, everybody was guarded still. They were just as guarded within those one-on-ones as they were outside. That's the thing about this cult, is that they are insane, because even in a one-on-one conversation, you cannot trust them, because everyone at any moment is planning to oust you. That's a scary thing, right? In the normal world, you can say anything to anyone, whether it's racist, whether it's sexist, whether you have a politically incorrect view that you wouldn't express in public, a joke that you wouldn't make. Even if you're like the most politically incorrect person, maybe you don't like black people, for example, you probably wouldn't say it out loud, or even in your group of friends, even if they're equally as on PC. But in private, you might say something. You wouldn't mind, because you trust them to understand where you're coming from. You understand that they would get why you're pissed off about something. It's not the same thing in this cult. Here, they're just waiting to virtue signal. And some people have made the mistake of giving too much information to these people, and they will out it later on as creeps or as non-believers, because that's how they operate. You can't trust anyone in a social justice environment, because they're all waiting for the other guy to fuck up so that they can climb over his corpse, plant a flag, and be like, I'm the lead social justice warrior. That's how they do it. And that's why, when an allegation surfaces about any one of them on the internet, instantly everybody pounces on them. It's not even the anti-SJW side that says, oh yeah, this guy's a creep. It's actually them. It's the social justice warriors who go after that person the hardest, more so than anybody else.
So one of the interesting things I find about the social justice warrior movement is, in almost any other big political or ideological movement I can think of, I can always find, at the very least, almost like a unicorn. I can always find one person who's actually quite reasonable, and maybe they're even eloquent, and there's something charismatic about them. And even if you don't in any way, and sometimes in extreme ways. So for example, a lot of people who admire Christopher Hitchens, a lot of the people who admire him probably are quite virulently against like Marxism, communism, etc. But he was obviously a fantastic proponent of certain elements of those ideas, and you could definitely appreciate the way he spoke. And a lot of people admired other opinions he had, etc. And so within all these different areas, you can usually find someone who at least seems like they've got the wherewithal where they can debate things and they're quite reasonable. Is there actually someone like that in this movement? Because obviously so far, with a lot of kind of the underhanded tactics we're talking about, no platforming, just labeling people racist, etc., it's an easy way to never have to engage with people. Is there actually someone out there? Is there someone who manages to somehow retain status within the social justice warrior world, yet simultaneously is also someone who is a rational person who will actually go out there and talk to people? Would you put anyone forwards for that candidacy?
I'd say no. If you are a rational human being, if you're a rational speaker of rational thinking, of rational thought, I should say, they'll kick you out. Look at Lacey Green is the perfect example. Yeah. She was the #1 feminist, the highest subscribed feminist on YouTube. She was their de facto spokesperson. But the instant she started reaching out to people, they deplatformed her, or at least attempted to. She's bigger than they are, right? But they don't talk to her anymore. Yesterday, she had posted a tweet stream saying that these are people that she had offered shelter to, cooked for, lived with, they would travel together. All these people have cut her out of their lives without even speaking to her. So, no, I would say that they don't allow it. They don't allow people who have divergent opinions, people who are wrong thinkers. People like Lacey Green, for speaking to someone outside the group is a sin. So they actually dissuade others from reaching out. And that's a scary thing. It's actually much scarier than most religions. I'd say most religions, whether it's Islam or Mormonism, they don't stop people from reaching out and just being social, because religion isn't their whole life. But it is a problem with religious cultists, people like ISIS, people like extreme fringe religions like the Westboro Baptist Church. And social justice is very much along these extremist lines.
So this might sound like a really weird question, and this is just my own observation, okay? And absolutely, if you think this is all nonsense, just let me know right up front. So I have actually noticed almost overwhelmingly that it does seem like the majority of social justice kind of areas of attack, or areas they feel like there's oppression and they have to fight within, no matter, even if you took it to some area that sounds like it has nothing to do with women. So say you were talking about transgender people who've changed from men into women and they're all black for some reason, some really niche group of people, right? There's obviously not many people would even make that up. Somehow they all seem to have a thread that does come back into feminism and eventually comes back to women. And this is the point I want to make, okay, which is, I think one of the reasons why I can't find the person I was asking about before, the unicorn of the person who's very rational and talks in this way, is because in some ways, some of those qualities, at least historically, are kind of male qualities. They're kind of the best of male qualities. Someone who isn't biased, but is, very forthright, and then they're willing to engage with people because they're not insecure. And so I've noticed in general, these movements are either all led by women, or if there are men, the men do take on that kind of, it's obviously been, we've derisively labeled them as the ally, it's like, they're all sort of the like simpering, like, oh, yes, mistress. It's never a forthright, sort of strong, it's never a confident man. And so the weird thing is, I've noticed nearly all these movements, especially at the base, when you get back to the feminist aspect of it, it is all just women who are very forthright in their own opinions. And then the men seem to only be these allies. Like, why? Is there a reason like a strong male person who's independently minded can't also exist within this philosophy?
Because they're not allowed to. Like, there are men who have tried and they were shamed for it. There's people like Charles Clymer, who people had dug up some old logs that he had said, and they shamed him for it. So he's not respected within the feminist community. When any man tries to rise up within these movements, he is literally shamed for it. And that, I think, is fine, because for the majority of the time, the men who are big proponents of feminism tend to be probably the worst people, because they still have that male aggression going for them. So they tend to attack women harder than women do. Like the people attacking, say, Lacey Green, many of them are women, obviously, but the loudest detractors of Lacey Green are among them men who attack her for being a wrong feminist. The men who there's so many men attacking C.H. Summers, who is a very wise person. They go after women all the time. And if you look at women who are not feminists, just regular women who are calling out feminism, the people attacking them are not going to be women most of the time. Most women are going to be like, if they're like mildly feminists, as in not social justice warriors, but whole feminist ideals, they're probably not going to go after another woman for not being a feminist. But a man will say, you're not being a right kind of woman. That's always the case. And that's why male allies are perhaps the most insidious of them all. They are a frustrating bunch to deal with, and they need to stay in their lane, as a lot of feminists would say. Unfortunately, They don't really know their place. So they tend to overstep their boundaries a lot of the time, and they're not given much leeway to speak their mind. So they feel rather oppressed, and that's why they lash out. So the way that men are treated within the feminist movement is, when I was a feminist, I couldn't say anything without being called out for it. And it was frustrating because, there were times I would, lash out against an anti-feminist woman. And there were, of course, times when I would point out a simple injustice. I would point out how perhaps hating men is not the best idea. And that would get me dogpiled. So that is a thing that happens. They don't allow men to have any opinions. So the men basically parrot what women do, but they ramp it up to like 1,000%, and it makes them terrible to deal with.
Because the reason why I kind of bring that up is because when I thought about this topic myself, like, first of all, there are obviously, one thing I love about thinking about any kind of topic is you've got to come up with a model initially, and you've got to kind of like see which parts fit together, but everyone can have a different model. Like, you can have different perspectives on it that all have different levels of validity. So for example, like, that's one of the reasons why I think Jordan Peterson is someone who's kind of taken the internet by storm, because since he comes from this world of like a clinician and psychologist, etc., he obviously comes prepackaged with his own models that a lot of people won't have heard of, because we're not in those, it's a very specialized field, he comes from. So when he breaks things down in terms like dominance, hierarchies and stuff, there's a lot of interesting stuff there. You just kind of got to get the vocabulary of what he's talking about. But my own is, when I looked at it this particular way, and I saw that there is, even when it's topics that don't seem to be about men and women, seems to be like the divide is largely men and women. Because as you're saying, even the men who are seemingly on the side of the women in that case, they're never really on their side. They're never allowed to be, because they're not women. They don't know it. They're actually in no man's land, sort of begging the other side, help, we want to join your side. And they're like, well, we'll just keep you out there for now, but we will definitely kill you before you ever get to join our side. You're never going to be on our side. So the point I wanted to make was this. I've always been surprised that people take so seriously the stupid tweets and like very, very, very low level abuse that men will give online. Because when I look at it, right, one aspect of Jordan Peterson's model of how he saw social justice that I found very interesting was where he said that if you go back to sort of evolutionary psychology, then the way that these people are behaving is how a mother behaves when she thinks her baby is going to be attacked by a snake. And it's the idea that like, right, well, obviously I love my baby. Like that's, its life is the most precious thing. And then since the enemy is this snake, I've got to destroy the snake. That's the only option. You can't deal with it. Right. You can't rationalize with it. So since they see their friend or a group or a type of a person as the baby, anything that they perceive as a threat, they must destroy instantly. Like, it's
a white knight syndrome.
Absolutely. Yeah. So here's the thing I have about that. Okay. That makes a lot of sense on the other side. And actually what's funny is when I think of it through that lens, I can kind of sympathize with them to a degree. I can see that, yes, this is a maternal instinct. This is something that's within women, or at least culturally within women, that's the way they are. And obviously, when that plays to your benefit, where you are a baby and it is that's a brilliant thing. Like, that's needed. It's necessary as he would say, in evolution. That's how presumably humans came to continue this trait. But the weird thing is, on the other side of the equation, like when I see men who behave in a manner like that, just saying stupid things, being low-level abusive, they're not really doing any big level of damage. It's obviously not nice to read those things, especially if you get a lot of them. That can be horrible, because it kind of has it boosts the signal, as it were, So even though the one person isn't saying anything crazy, I've always put it like this, okay? Anyone who doesn't have any followers will think to themselves, just ignore that, And I always say this, right? If you were walking down the street and one person was like, you piece of shit, you'd think, I don't know, that guy, maybe he wasn't even talking about me. He doesn't know me. You'd blow it off. But if every person as you walk down the street said, you piece of shit, eventually at the end, you would be like, shut up! Like, everyone fucking hell. It'd build up, So what the part that's bizarre to me is, why do you think that level of very low level abuse, which to me is just young men, it's just ignorance, quite frankly, they're ignorant in their own way. I mean, famously, by the way, whenever you bring up this topic and you try to state, like, you chop away at a lot of the bullshit, okay, so you chop away at the fact that, listen, thousands of people didn't send death threats to Brianna Wu. That just clearly didn't happen. Like, the FBI can tell you that didn't happen, okay? Not credible. And likewise, all gamers don't want to see women abused in video games. Likewise, all men don't want women to not be allowed in the work. All these things that are easy to chop away at. The problem is, you will always have that annoying thing where as you're chopping away at it, a bunch of men will just comment like, yeah, that'll show them bitches. And you're like, oh, come on, guys, that's exactly what we're trying to show. That's not what's going on, What do you think of that aspect? Because it's so vilified, right? And there's clearly something negative there, but it doesn't feel like anyone's put that in its correct place, its box. What do you think that comes from in men, like in young men? Because it is present, right?
Yeah, right. It is present. I don't think the men realize what they're doing, what they're contributing to. And I think it's only because humanity has not yet been able to adapt to social media. This is a problem with social media. This wouldn't happen in real life. Very rarely would a person be that famous, right? A regular person wouldn't be that famous in real life. They would have to be murderers or pedophiles or rapists to face that kind of constant abuse. But whereas online, you can be shamed for having an opinion. That's not a thing that's ever happened before. Not until Twitter and Facebook and LiveJournal came up. And now we are dealing with that. You have regular people, many of them young, 16-year-olds, 18-year-olds, 10-year-olds even, being bullied online by large numbers of people. And I don't think people realize the impact that a single tweet, whether it just says, hey, you're stupid, can impact a person like that. Because that, hey, you're stupid is by itself nothing, right? It's meaningless. But if 10,000 people were to say it, it can get rather annoying. And, as you and I know, because we have tens of thousands of followers, we're kind of used to it. We're like media personalities. We're like, I guess you could say, celebrities, and they're also pretty used to it. But for the average person, they're not. So for them, when they even get like 20 mentions, they will start crying. They'll shut down.
Yeah.
And I think this has to come with education. People need to learn about how their words can impact people. But at the same time, it shouldn't come at the cost of free speech. There shouldn't be laws preventing people from saying mean things or criticizing other people, because that has the effect of censoring the individual, and that is the opposite of what we want. So, I mean, if you had to choose, if you asked me if I had to choose between, the mass harassment, or even not a harassment, but, just mass feedback versus censorship, I would take the mass harassment. Because I don't believe in censoring individual speech. People can have dumb ideas. I can ignore it. I can choose not to tweet. I can choose not to say things that upset people. Any one of these people can do so, but they choose not to. They put their tweets out there in the public saying all men should die. What do they expect when someone replies? What do they expect when 10,000 people reply and say, hey, maybe you stop being a bitch? That they bring it upon themselves. And yes, it sounds like victim blaming, but it's true. It's just a fact. Don't say stupid things online and maybe people won't reply. Same goes for both sides, really. I mean, I can't really complain about all the SJWs clogging up my feed with insults and mockery because they don't like me. I say things that they don't like, so I expect it. I can't complain about it. I don't like it, but I can't really complain. I don't have a right to do that. Likewise, I expect them to be the same way. If they say something dumb, people are going to respond. Simple as that.
So one of the strange things I've noticed is that the easiest area to attack social justice warriors on is just the area of hypocrisy, where, for example, we've just outlined how they do receive abuse. And listen, some of it I've kind of argued away. It isn't as critical as they make out. It's not really dangerous threats that are happening to them, etc. But this is just idiots saying stupid stuff, as we all know a 15-year-old kid who goes on the internet might do. But
Correct.
The problem is, you would think people who receive such things and say things like, this is abuse, it's harassment, they ramp up the vocabulary and then they let their feelings kind of catch up with where they've ramped up the imagery until it's violence and, being oppressed.
It's violence. They love that word.
Yeah, exactly. Well, you would think the sort of person who said that, if they're someone who themselves, cares about their own ethical consistency, would never do that to another person. But obviously that's the easiest area. You find practically any social justice warrior who claims to have been harassed all day long, their Twitter feed, if you go to the tweets they're making, they're going to be doing the same thing. Now, listen, they think they're doing it from a virtuous aspect, but this is another area I find really interesting about this subculture, because if I look elsewhere, okay, there's a lot of people who I actually am interested in who are who kind of figureheads on other sides of this equation. So actually, I'll give you some examples. Would be like Joe Rogan to some degree, Jordan Peterson. These are people where actually one thing I admire about them is they're actually probably even a bit more kind of egoless than I am. Like personally, if I kind of think someone's fucked up, I'll still give them the time of day and I'll definitely try to be ethically consistent. I wouldn't shut down their free speech if I want my own, but I will kind of think fuck what that person's saying. We know what they've done, But actually, if you have a look, people like Joe Rogan, John Peterson, they'll be incredibly fair with these. They'll be like, yeah, maybe you have a point there. Oh, maybe I do have to think about this. They'll be very fair. It's almost impossible, again, to find someone like that, as far as I can tell, who's one of the leading social justice warriors. I can't think of one.
No, there isn't a single one. In my experience, there isn't a single one because... And disagreement with them, I'm not even going to say an attack on them because it's using their language, but disagreement with them is equal to violence. And violence, if you commit violence on them, if you disagree with them, then they are obliged to commit violence against you, whether it's punching your face or doing, attacking you in any way possible, because they feel justified.
All that stuff.
And this comes with the control of language. This comes from postmodernism, from academia. The idea that, you can control language, you can redefine it to redefine existing terms to fit your own worldview. That is a thing that they are doing to basically control the narrative. That's why so many of them are in the media itself, in journalism, on Twitter. They're the loudest people there. They have tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of followers who all have this view, and they are trying to dominate essentially how to speak and what to think, what to say, everything. It's mind control is what it is. And it's terrifying.
One thing that I found really bizarre is that even though some of these people are actually, if you look at what they've done, they've been very influential. Some of them have spoken in front of the fucking United Nations, and as you say, are running for Congress and have raised hundreds of thousands of dollars. The actual things these people have done, if I could take aside the content of what they've done, I'd say that is an accomplishment, actually. That's pretty amazing you've managed that. But the bizarre thing is this, okay? they don't actually have that many real followers. Like, not that many people actually seem to know who they are, like, as a person. They might have had impact, you know, they might have pushed out the snowball that, you know, at the end of the hill is massive, but they don't have like 500,000 Twitter followers, you know. Listen, I come from the esports world, right? And esports is still not that big. It's pretty big for a niche subculture, you know. So there's players in esports who aren't the best player in the world who have 200,000 followers, you know. Why do you think that they actually, like, it's like, what's bizarre is, it's like, yeah, they are the sort of strike of the match that sets the forest fire, but they're never the forest fire. You know, they always have to just keep striking the little match over and over again. Why don't, if they have such a big impact, if the whole world listens to them, or the media world, or the business world, academia has to listen to them, why are they still so small to some degree? What do you think that's about?
I think it's because individually they're small people who have never accomplished anything in their lives besides starting fires. And that's what they are. They're, I wouldn't even call them historical arsonists, right? Like someone like Donald Trump or Genghis Khan, they would be historical arsonists. Sure. They are people who impact change. Like the guy is a billionaire. He runs one of the biggest construction companies in the world. So I get that. He's a very accomplished man, very great man, right? Regardless of your views of him. But someone like Zoe Quinn, you know, they don't have any real accomplishments. I mean, what games has she made? She's made one game, and it's not even a game. It's a text adventure. If it's not even an adventure, you can finish it in 30 minutes, right? I could make one. Anyone, you could make one. It's easy. And yet she's striking these matches and starting fires that are unstoppable, and that's what they're doing. But deep down, I mean, not deep down, but like, on the face of it, they are not really important people. They are like the assassin of Franz Ferdinand. Like, who is that guy, right? Sure, I don't even remember his name. Yeah.
I think he was exactly called Gavrilo Princip, but you're right. He's a nobody, essentially. All he did was kill that person, right?
Yeah, but he's a nobody, right? He's just some fucking kid.
Yeah. So okay, here's a question for you, okay? I realize this might sound like a repeat of the questions before, because obviously as an interviewer, I have to ask in a naive way, as though, why is this here? Why do they not like people disagreeing with them, you know? So my question would be this. I realize in your world, you haven't just fractured from them and left. You're gone forever to them. You're an exile, pariah, and you've very much gone off to a totally different world. So obviously they would have no contact with you anymore. But is there a reason why there isn't some kind of middle ground? Like, there isn't some famous person who they don't totally write off, but who they would do interviews with, and they would kind of explicate what they mean more, and occasionally be a little bit challenged? Yes, I understand from as you've described their mentality, they'll never let someone totally say the opposite or, you know, really seemingly attack them. But is there a reason why there's no one who kind of even they can bring in from outside and at least use this person like, okay, I don't like them necessarily, but they're not as bad as the people who are the oppressors. At least I can talk to this person. And, you know, because if I wanted to actually get the word out there, that would be a great way. I mean, again, I'll use the example of Christopher Hitchens. One of the clever things I thought he did when he brought that book out, God Is Not Great, was famously on his book tour, he would go and actually say, no, put me in somewhere in the Bible Belt, arrange for like a competent pastor type guy to debate me, because his notion was, you know, the people who bought my book, that's preaching to the choir, you know. They all know the stuff in this book, you know, in general. They all kind of agree. But I want to get the ideas out there to people who don't necessarily know these things, never heard them before, never heard these arguments. So let me get them out there. And listen, he's not trying to literally proselytize, but he's just trying to put the ideas out there, and they have whatever effect they have. It doesn't seem like they have the same impetus in that sense. They only want to stay inside their little world, and yet they're having this impact on the world. But they don't ever somehow... Like, they don't even seem to understand the concept of going into enemy territory and winning out that way. What's that all about?
And not even in the right way, right? Like, to win the hearts and minds, you have to do it peacefully. You can't go in by the sword. And right now, they're doing it by the sword. They're basically trying to shame people, intimidate people, and all that nonsense. And it doesn't work. It just pisses people off. It radicalizes other people. They have no interest in speaking to Milo. He has reached out to them. You know, Milo Yiannopoulos,
yes,
friends of Richard Lewis, right? He has reached out to them, asked to debate with them, and they refuse flat out. There were attempts during Gamergate's time to speak out to SJWs, have a panel, right? The whole Gamergate debate. That was unfortunately canceled early because they called in a bomb threat. Yes. On the panel. That's a thing that happened. There was supposed to be a second panel that never happened either, because again, bomb threats and a lack of response on the SJW side. And I think the reason, to get to the crux of the issue, since you asked, I think the reason why is because they're fragile. They know they can't really defend their opinions. Their opinions are so indefensible in the face of rationality that they would crumble. So they would prefer an ideological echo chamber, just as James Damore wrote in his memo. Google itself is an ideological echo chamber. Yes. They don't allow people to speak out. And anyone who speaks out is ostracized, fired in his case. And so it's because of fragility. They would rather promote, create an ideological echo chamber that gets bigger and bigger, larger and larger, while threatening people who dare to speak out with penalties, with exile, as you said.
Do you think, like, this might sound like I've really, I'm a true dreamer by even asking this question, right? Would it not be possible for Ian, who knows these people, to somehow, listen, you get through to one of them and you just say to them, listen, obviously we're on different sides of the fence on this one, we have very differing views, we're never going to agree, etc. But listen, one thing I'd like to do is kind of show the world the better side of you. I know you as a person, we're friends, everyone's being drawn in such ridiculous, stark contrasts of this person's evil, or this person's good,
caricatures.
How about let me do an interview with you, let me show you a bit more, let me show the world, the person that I know that isn't totally like that. And yeah, we can disagree on the opinions. Could you never get one of them in that way? Couldn't you lure one out in some way?
No, I've tried speaking to these people. They block instantly, or they meme at you. I've tried to have good faith conversations, whether on Twitter or in private, and these people will cut you off. They either don't respond, or they will respond in the rudest fashion. Your attempts to reach out are going to be mocked. So there is no incentive, really, for me to even do that. But even if I had the incentive to do it, they wouldn't bite. They wouldn't go for it. Their response would be instant repulsion towards me, because to them, I am perhaps as bad as a Nazi. I saw a tweet yesterday saying, "Good morning to everyone except Ian Miles Cheong." And so this person would say good morning to the murderers and serial killers and rapists of the world, but he wouldn't say good morning to me. It's interesting to know. Very interesting.
So, to tie back into a theme I said before, where again, the problem is, this is a problem in life in general, Ian, which is that there's a lot of people that we all know, they're our family, our friends, who are like relatively smart, they're relatively reasonable people, they're just normal people, And the problem is, a lot of them aren't on the internet and they aren't following weird subcultures like we are. So when you tell them these things, you almost feel like you've come out the Matrix and you're trying to explain something like, oh no, and then there was all like, and then they're like, wait a minute, what? Like, come on, this all sounds ridiculous. And part of the problem is, okay, again, the way that because they're normal people, they make the mistake of thinking everyone else in the world's a normal person. So they'll say stuff like, oh, no, they don't really believe that, they're just being cynical. So for example, I've seen a lot of people say that when these big companies, Google, when governments even put in place laws that seem like incredibly restrictive of freedom of speech and personal liberties, presumably for social justice warrior reasons, like some of the transgender pronoun issues, when these things happen, some people almost still don't feel too scared because they say, no, you have to understand, they're just being politicians, they're being cynical. They know which way the tide's turning on this one, so they're going to go with the flow. They're going to make sure they're not kind of getting attacked. And the reason why they say this is, oh, it's not that bad, is they're kind of implying, because the good thing is, if someone was like that, okay, the hope is, right, well, if we can ever get the tide to turn, then they'll come back. They're not gone forever. They'll change the laws. They'll change, and that would actually not be such a scary world. But this is my question. Fine. Do you actually think that's reasonable? Do you think some of these head people are they basically are just social justice warriors who've climbed the tree?
Yes, that's what social justice warriors do. That's what activists do. They climb the tree to get to the top. And once they're at the top, they implement their policies. Look at Yahoo. Marissa Mayer, she ran the place to the ground with her social justice policies. She tried to get a lot of men fired from the company for the sole explicit reason that men don't deserve positions of power. So, yeah, I think that these people are dangerous because they can bring a company or a country to its knees if not dealt with. And I'm talking about activists. Hitler was an activist, and okay. It's funny to compare SJWs to Hitler, but really they
like to do it to other people a lot. So maybe it's irony, right?
Right. Yeah, it is. With anyone, with any activist group, their sole purpose in life is to become politically active and basically enact their policies, their changes onto society. That's why they lead student unions. You go to any university, you'll find student unions, whether it's usually leftists because they're very politically active. There are people on the right who do it, but people on the right nowadays are generally just moderate conservatives or libertarians. They don't advocate for, authoritarianism, suppression of free speech. They're on the side of level-headedness, whereas people on the left are calling for bias. What is it called? Bias response teams. Those are basically thought police. They police you for your speech, for your thoughts, for microaggressing by wearing braids if you're a white person, for example. They are completely in charge of these places, and the people who pander to them, like the college deans, the teachers, the professors, are either shamed into submission or told, they lose their jobs for speaking out. Like they tried to get Jordan Peterson fired, for example. Yes. They got Brett Weinstein, they threatened him off campus. Right now he's speaking out against them. He's a great guy. He's a liberal. But he's not an SJW because he saw the authoritarianism, like the rise of it back in the religious right back in the 70s and 80s. So he knows that this is like the left's version of it, and they're much worse. So yeah, they're dangerous people, and people who keep pandering to them are feeding the beast. Because a lot of people in power don't want to lose their power. They assume that this is my voting bloc, or rather, these are the people who basically allowed me to keep my job, so I'm going to give in to all their demands, which is what happened at Evergreen, right? The college headmaster was like, okay, yeah, I'm gonna acquiesce to all your demands, and let's do it. I'll be fine here. But what happened was, in the end, they ended up taking over the place. So I don't think that's a good idea at all. Like, yeah, some companies might give in to the social justice warriors only because they don't want the drama, the lawsuits, or the allegations and people going to the press about how they're not diverse or something. But what happens in the end is these people get promoted to the top and take it over.
As I alluded to before, whenever we talk about some of the very specific details of things social justice warriors done, it does sound like the plot of a sci-fi movie. Like, anyone who's a normal person watching this video is going to think, come on, that surely is not happening. But you have to understand, to touch on what you just said now, you have to understand these people are activists. Like, which of us, there's nothing I feel so strongly about in the world that I would literally, sacrifice everything in my life to see this one thing enacted. There's I have opinions I like and things that I think are worth standing up for, etc. But I would never, that takes a kind of pathological mindset to think I must make this idea, essentially everything around me in the world must reflect this idea, and I'll do whatever it takes. And so if you understand that philosophy, then you will understand why, and this is why I say it's going to sound sci-fi when I bring this up to people who don't know this. There is literally a trend where famously feminists have managed to take over certain tech companies by running this particular scam again and again, where what they do is they have obviously a female member of the feminist movement. It's not really a surprise. A woman of some kind will get into a one-on-one situation with a head person, a famous programmer, developer, human resources person, whoever it might be. As soon as you're in a one-on-one situation and it's now your word against them because no one knows what happened there, outside of that they claim some degree of sexual harassment. Now it might be as simple as sexist remarks, or they might just outright say the person raped me. And in many cases this is there's been no evidence for this whatsoever, but that's obviously the ultimate way to get someone ousted.
It's weaponizing their sexuality.
Absolutely, yes. And so if people heard this, and obviously there have been articles written on this where certain people, famously Linus Torvalds, the guy who came up with the Linux kernel that runs a lot of computers in the world, he famously said, I will not be in a room alone with a woman because of this. I've seen what's happened to other people. Yeah. So when you hear this sounds like vampires. It sounds like space vampires come in, and if you ever let them get one-on-one with you, they infect you, they take over, and now, it's like a movie, there's like an enemy from outside. Is it really this crazy? Are these isolated incidences?
I think these are isolated incidences because I wouldn't say that most women are like this, but there are activist women who will do stuff like this. They will weaponize their sexuality in order to get what they want. And this isn't just women per se. This is like trans women as well. But going back to women, there was the elevator gate incident. If any of you remember that, it was what divided the atheism or skeptic community back in 2007 or something like that, or maybe it was later. But what happened was it split the community between people who follow Richard Dawkins and so on with the feminists. This is when what happened was a woman, a very prominent woman within the skeptic community, went into an elevator at some convention, and some guy asked her if she would like to have a coffee.
Yes.
And she cried about it. She wrote a blog about how bad this was for a man to ask her, to have this
I believe wasn't it something along the lines of like she was also someone speaking at the convention. They were both sort of peers, right? I think, and then he thought naively, oh, maybe we have something in common. Let's get a call. And he was implying, like, let's see what happens from there, right? But that's basically all that happened in the story, right?
It's just a flirting thing, right? It's not a big deal. Yeah. So to anyone else, it's like, okay, a guy maybe that I don't like or that I don't find attractive asked me for a coffee. I said no. End of story. End of story. Maybe it was unpleasant to be asked it because he didn't want to be asked it, but it's not harassment. It's just how, flirting works. So sometimes it works out, sometimes it doesn't. Doesn't mean it's harassment, but that became a big feminist issue. It split the community, divided it between, the fedora wearing people and the whole atheism plus, and that was feminists basically. And the whole thing fell apart. Now there's no real atheism community left. It died because of that. And going back to, like I said, trans women, there's these trans activists, like I think the most prominent one I can think of is Coraline Ada Emke, who came up with something called the Code of Conduct. And I'm sure you've seen Code of Conduct at Google. I'm sure you've seen it at any convention, even a gaming convention, E3, PAX, they all use the same Code of Conduct. And the idea behind this Code of Conduct is basically behave yourselves, right? And I would be okay with that. I think anybody would be, but that's a misnomer because the Code of Conduct is written in such a way that it basically permits a company to fire a person on ideological grounds. So if, say, I'm a conservative or I'm a classical liberal, I'm not a progressive social justice warrior, they can fire me because my views are too offensive to them. And this person has used this Code of Conduct and pushed it to hundreds of different tech companies in Silicon Valley. That's why companies like Drupal, like Google and so on, are all being affected by it right now. And this is like the spread of social justice. You have, I want to say, people who are pushing the Code of Conduct onto their own companies. They're arguing that it's a good thing, that it's going to be good for productivity, but all it does is it stifles dissent and it promotes a progressive ideology within these environments. And it's all done by, on the basis of, say, sexism. They claim it's sexism, it's anti-sexism. But really, all it is it stops people from having different ideas.
So one thing that I find very weird about a lot of social justice philosophy, ideology, is that there always tends to be this really bizarre element of paradox to it, or where it contradicts itself. And that's one thing that's very weird, because in some ways it wouldn't have to, but they always seem to attack, like, it's almost like they try to take both sides of the argument, but only the parts they like. And so I'll give you a good example, okay, from my own world of gaming, okay? So whenever this topic comes up, because this is one of the very rare areas that social justice interacts with esports, is how many women are there who are pro players? How many women's tournaments are there? That'll be like where it initially sort of creeps in through the door. Mm-hmm. And one of the ways I've always been able to kind of chop away at the root before it took hold and too many people bought in that bullshit is I always say this, well, which is it? Is it that there are so few women who play the game that obviously there aren't enough for them to be good, and therefore, since there aren't enough that are good, no one wants to watch them, and therefore there aren't pro gamers that are women? That's like, you see how that's consistent argument. Well, the problem is they'll say that there should be more, there aren't enough women because, you men have scared them all away, and, you've been so oppressive to them. But then they'll also make a separate argument, later on when they think you've forgotten that part, and they'll say, right, this is sexism. If you look at the stats, just as many women play game as men.
Oh, yeah, that's a bullshit stat.
So it's like, which is it? It can't be both. Not least because here's the part that I think people never bring up, is if it was true, for example, let's say that in my games, okay, Counter-Strike, League of Legends, let's say 50% of women were playing the game. Well, then logically, apparently women don't even want to watch the women play. If those women themselves just wanted to watch women play and they watch the female tournaments, it would instantly have a viewer base. And I can tell you from knowing companies, they are cynical. Sponsors will jump on that. They would make tournaments for that. Those players would be famous because guess what? Women would watch the interviews of the players. It naturally could happen. They could change it tomorrow if it was true. Absolutely. Now, the problem with this is, if you look at this in all the other areas of the world, so obviously like television, media and stuff like that, they'll say the same thing. They'll say, oh, there's not enough women represented in. I mean, I wouldn't say Game of Thrones for that one, because you notice they don't ever make that argument for Game of Thrones. Too many bloody women in the minute, so now it's all, are there enough black people? Next to obviously not enough transgender people. We all know the list that they go down here, so they've already lost that one. There's too many women in Game of Thrones, if anything. They're all the main characters.
All the leaders.
They're all the ones that survive, mate. They're the only ones that don't get killed, if you noticed in that show.
Yes.
So here's the funny thing. You would think to yourself, logically, that if women really wanted to get involved with coding and stuff, if so many were doing it, they'd be making games that women love. Therefore, you know what? Women would be massive purchasers of games. It seems to me that there's always that paradox, isn't it? They never acknowledge that part. They try to claim both sides at once. There's no one in it because we're so sexist. But actually, wait a minute, it's half of us are in it, and you're just not catering to us. And somehow it's not different people. People are going to think, oh, you've taken different arguments. No, that's the same people say the same.
It's the same people.
Yeah.
Yes. So addressing that, for the 50% of women are gamers thing, that's a bullshit statistic, right, from the ESA. And how it classifies it, I've looked into this, is it says that basically anyone who owns a phone that can play a video game or a place like Farmville is a gamer. And that is nonsense, because these people would not identify as gamers, first of all. And secondly, Farmville does not equal Dota 2, right? It's two completely different games. Yeah. They're different. And if you look at perhaps the actual statistics, the people who, maybe there are no statistics of this because they don't want to release them, but judging on anecdotal evidence and how many people actually view these streams and so on, the split's gonna be 95% men to 5% female, right? It's just women are just not interested in watching people play Counter-Strike in general. I'm not saying they don't exist, but on average they're not. And that's a funny thing, is when you see stuff like 95% to 5, they'll say oh, you said no women. No, I'm saying average, the average woman is not going to watch Counter-Strike or play it for that matter. And so the women who do are kind of like unicorns, and, good for them. Sure. They shouldn't feel excluded. No one should exclude them because they're playing the game just like anybody else. But it's disingenuous to say that it's a 50% split. It isn't. And so when they claim that, women are the most gamers in the world and therefore all the sexist and blah, 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 it doesn't add up. None of their arguments really add up. They don't make any sense, because if women were 50% of the gaming audience of, say, any of these hardcore games, not even hardcore games, just, Counter-Strike, Call of Duty, whatever, then why is it that sexism is so rampant? How is it that 50% of those women, why don't they just speak up? It's because they don't exist. The first part about how you do need to get more women into playing these games, I think that's fair. I think it's fine to make gaming a more welcoming environment, or produce more games that are perhaps female friendly. I think there's a market for that. It doesn't not exist. Sure. Just maybe people haven't made those games yet. But it's disingenuous to say that they're already there. Because if they're already there, then why even bother with the first part?
Because, that's the part that I think, this is where, for me, those people exist in a science fiction universe. Now, I'm sure you've probably heard of this, but it's a famous quality of people who are very young and believe, communism and Marxism are the ultimate ideology, that they almost never have a background in economics, right? Because if you ever look at the basic economics of these things, whether you find the ideas romantic or you like some elements of them, economically, it's very difficult to make them work, and hence none of those societies have ever really been successful in that regard. Right. Well, likewise, in the world of games, like I say, if when we're talking about games or media, whatever it may be, films, movies, comic books, if it was the case that we follow their logic, right? Okay, what happens is people who are not white, or they're women, or they're transgender, or whatever their background that makes them some sort of minority, aren't represented, and because they aren't represented, they can't relate to these kinds of media. And so their logic goes, if you give them this kind of media, you represent them, right? This is the part they never follow up on. The logic goes, they should then consume those media, and therefore life should get better. That's where it always falls down, isn't it? Because when you make a comic that's about a Muslim character who's a young girl, you don't tend to get many people buy that comic. Apparently, even Muslim young girls don't buy it. And the problem with this logic
they don't care.
Yeah, exactly. So the part that's bizarre about the logic there is that then simultaneously, not only will they not bother addressing, like, well, where are all the Muslim girls buying this comic? You know, we're representing the fuck out of them. What don't they want comics about themselves? They'll never address that, but simultaneously they'll always say this and look at the response from men, because you'll get a lot of men, right, who will say, I don't want to read a fucking comment about a Muslim girl. Now, what's funny about that is, again, they're having their cake and eating it, because what they were complaining about before is, I can't appreciate. Imagine I'm the woman here. I can't appreciate Spider-Man because I'm a transgender woman who's a person of color, and so I can't relate to Spider-Man. By the way, totally legitimate opinion. I mean, personally, I don't have to enjoy media based on the fact they look like me, but hey, that's just me. Right. Maybe I have a great imagination, you know. But okay, let me just say that's a valid opinion, okay? They could say, right, you know, I can't really relate to it. But they can't seem to understand why a man then who likes comics, who sees a comic changed to be a Muslim young girl, can't say, well, I can't really relate to that, you know. Like, I personally don't want to buy that.
He's a bad guy for saying it.
Again, you lose no matter what, right? You can't win.
It's always a male fragility, white fragility, all this nonsense. And, you know, I think the biggest reason why, say, a white male or something wouldn't buy these comics isn't because the main character is a Muslim girl. It's actually because they don't like the political correctness of it. Like, men are perhaps the biggest buyers of the Wonder Woman comic. Yes. Even the movies, men went and watched it and had no problem with it. Why? Because she's a great character.
I mean, Buffy the Vampire Slayer is the ultimate example for me, because that was way before social justice, right? I used to love that shit.
Yeah. Well, Xena, Xena.
Absolutely, yeah.
Fantastic character. All these shows, fantastic characters, main female characters, and they succeeded because they were good. They didn't depend on political correctness to be good. They were just good, period. So that's all people want. The general audience, the general guy or woman or whatever, watching the show or reading a comic book or playing a video game, all they want is a good story with good characters that they can relate to. It doesn't matter what race or skin color they are. They just relate to them as human beings. Because unlike social justice warriors, the normal person isn't a racist, sexist asshole.
Yeah.
Simple as that.
Okay, so this is actually a topic that I wanted to get to, which was... Okay, this is going to sound like bad timing to ask this question, because until about a week ago, Ian, I could have said to you, one of the reasons why I get annoyed by people implying that we live in the most sexist, racist times ever, and particularly they always make America, because it's the center of media, you know. America's the hotbed of racism and stuff, and Trump's, America is all terrible, etc., etc. I mean, I realize, like I say, the timing's not that great for that, because there has been something of a racist protest recently of people who probably aren't the best representatives, etc. But prior to that, there's so little of that actually goes on in the world. Like, I can actually say from knowing people in America, going to America, it's gotten a lot better year on year on year, decade by decade by decade, and nothing to do with social justice, by the way. That wasn't in any way directing its course.
It's just natural.
And in fact, generally, you look around the world, and it's very rare that you see people, especially people who have any status, openly saying things that are racist or sexist, because even outside of the social justice world, these people get shunned for that. They get shamed for that. People will look down on them. Even just that alone is a big deal, you know. Someone just looks down on you, or they don't seem to like you as much. These sorts of things are what will actually naturally change people's behavior, you know, and make people think that maybe that's not as reasonable, or maybe I should keep that to myself. And for me, by the way, that's always the Rubicon I never cross, which is as soon as the person decides, okay, I have a view that Thorin doesn't agree with, right? I think women are inferior, for example. As long as he keeps that inside his own brain and never acts on that, I actually have no problem at that point in time. He can think anything he wants in his own mind, you know. Now, obviously, other people don't agree with me and they want to go further, like, well, let's get inside his mind and start tinkering around, you know. That's unreasonable. But the point I'm making is, to me, I look around the world and there is so little actual racism and sexism, except if you put the words white or you put the words men into a sentence, and suddenly it's everywhere. It's all over social media. There's famous celebrities, there's university professors who want white genocide and who think that white people should apologize for everything, and that, you know, if more white people just aren't alive, that would be a brilliant thing. These opinions can be said openly, and they actually you don't get what I just said. You don't get publicly shamed. You don't get
backlash. Work.
Yeah. What do you think about this world? Because that's what's the scary thing to me, that we actually live in a world where somehow racism and sexism came back. They just changed the gender and the skin color.
I think people are looking for retribution. It's not even justified. None of these people have ever experienced oppression. And many of the people screaming about white men are white men themselves. That's the funny thing. They hate themselves so much. I think, okay, so being honest here, I think it comes from a place of self-loathing. These people hate themselves. That's why they do it. They lash out. They instead of addressing their insecurities, the problems that they dislike about themselves. Maybe they're fat, maybe they're ugly, maybe they don't work quite as much, and they're disappointed in themselves. Instead of addressing these things, excuse me, they call themselves, like you look at their names on Twitter, they call themselves Garbage Human, for example. It's just kind of funny. And I don't mean in the Sargon of Akkad, kind of way. Yes. I mean like they genuinely dislike themselves. Like they mean it when they call themselves garbage people, right? It's not meant ironically. They're projecting all that self-loathing onto the rest of the world. They don't like other people, but they hate themselves even more. So it just tends to get projected outwards, because where else does it have to go? Anything less and they might commit suicide. And they, obviously they're too egotistical for that. So they lash out. And white men, as it happens, are an easy target, because for a long time feminism and social justice has been preaching that white men are part of the patriarchy that controls the world, that they are responsible for all the bad things in the planet. So it's easy for them to be like, oh yeah, that's a target I can attack. Let's go with that instead of addressing the actual inequalities, the actual issues that society faces. Let's blame it on a boogeyman. Just like, in gaming, they blame it on Gamergate, because Gamergate to these people is essentially white men. Gamergate is white men. I mean, you look at all these articles, type in Google, Gamergate white men. Yes. I think you'll find a billion of those. Same thing.
Because the most bizarre part, like I said, about if you compare my worldview to theirs, is that, if I'm presumptuous enough for the sake of the question to assume my worldview in any way reflects reality, their worldview comes off looking like some really crazy sci-fi world, like an alternate world, a movie. Like, imagine if everyone was just racist and did it all the time, and you know what, every company's racist and hates black people, etc. Even though you look, and in reality, diversity things are there. They're having to hire people even as token people, where even if they themselves
the
don't
CEO
necessarily
is
think
black,
they're good enough, absolutely, it's all over the place. Likewise, all of the media that is considered credible are people who absolutely spout the same agenda and reinforce it and signal boost it, and politicians buy into it, and the United Nations buys into it. Everyone, pop singers, famous people, the whole world is screaming back at these people within the echo chamber that they exist in. You are right, we agree with all your things, everyone is sexist. And yet, where's all the sexism? Because again, right, if we lived in this sci-fi world that I call it Trump's America, because that's what they always label it, right? The sci-fi world of Trump's America in the Twilight Zone episode we're talking about. The number one newspaper is Breitbart Weekly, and in that one, they actually write every day about how all Muslims need to go home, and actually, they say like, record amounts of unemployment among transgender people of color. Hurrah! Great title. This is for a column, and all this stuff's going on, but that. You would think that ridiculous caricature I just gave there was the world. If you hear the way they talk, you would think that's the world.
Yeah, you would think so, right? When you're caught in that ideological echo chamber, you're going to think that everybody's against you. It's this it comes from a mentality of victimhood, and that's enforced by feminism, I believe. Feminism it's not the idea that women should be equal to men. It's the idea that women are victims, and that men should suffer for it. That's all it is. It's not empowering to women like it used to be once upon a time, second wave feminism, for example. But now, you don't see feminists talking about empowerment. Now all you do see is them talking about taking down the patriarchy, fighting against an oppressor. Why? Because we're oppressed. We're oppressed. We're always oppressed. They can be at the head of Sony, Amy Pascal, for example, a great example. She produced the Ghostbusters. She's one of the richest people in the world. I mean, she'd be like top 0.1%. And yet she's talking about female oppression and how we need to make more movies about women. Where is the oppression she's ever faced? She doesn't have any oppression. What is she talking about? Some of the most watched movies of this year are Wonder Woman. That's a female-driven movie. Yeah. Female cast, female director, and yet still people are talking about women's oppression. Really? Wow. Fantastic. Good to know.
Yeah. Madness. This is one of the things that's very weird to me, because here's the funny thing, okay? Think about the things people accuse you of. So they'll say the same thing. You just race bait, or you're a hate mongerer. You know, they always have all these extreme ways of describing it, because you're someone who writes about free speech issue, chronicles things that social justice warriors do, things that they don't want to see printed, right? But the thing is, you aren't writing for the Times of London in a head guest column, you know. That's what would happen if people who they claim is your political class, which obviously no one can really identify, but they'll claim as alt-right, you know. If that was really the case, if that dominated the world, you would have a massive media platform. They would never be able to get their words out there. So what's bizarre is, it does feel a bit worrying in that sense, because if they can exist in such a parallel universe that essentially nothing from this world can sort of ever interject there and kind of show them that, like, oh, this is a bit different than you thought. Is there ever any way that this comes back? Because, you know, a lot of people now think, right, well, maybe this is just an extreme. You know, the pendulum will swing back the other way, and then things will get quiet down again. Do you think it does, at least from these people? Is there some way that they can kind of retract back under the rock wherever they came from?
I don't think so.
That's a bit depressing.
I think they have too much invested in it for not to. I think they'll get worse, but I do think the backlash against them will rise. I think people will get louder and louder to fight against them, because as they grow louder, so will other people. And I think what the world needs right now is for this to blow up, so that it can calm the hell down. Because that's like the only thing that will fix it, right? It's like boiling a pot of water. You know, at some point, if you keep boiling it, it's going to overflow. But once it overflows enough, that's when, you know, there's no more water left, right? Yeah. So that's what needs to happen. But it's not going to happen by itself. There needs to be a cataclysm, is what I'm saying. So either, you know, we go to war with North Korea. That could be a thing that brings the world together, you know, or at least brings Americans together, because they'll be so busy thinking about that they won't have to worry about social justice issues for quite a while. Or, you know, something really bad happens in the U.S. itself, something like yesterday, except 100 times worse. So that is a thing that could happen, that could get people to reflect upon it and be like, okay, yeah, we've gone too far now. Or perhaps they will go too far, and there will be a giant issue, maybe a civil war, who knows? But that's the only time it can calm the hell down back again. Because I think Loping, I don't know if you follow him, he's Gaming and Pandas on Twitter. He said yesterday he was making his predictions that we have gone past the point of if. Can anything be done? You know, that's the big question. Can anything be done about this political violence? And we have gone past that point by now. You know, when people started ramping up the rhetoric about punching other people, assaulting other people, and then yesterday and now people are talking about retribution. So I don't think, you know, it's going to stop. Not anytime soon. It's going to get worse and worse and worse until it explodes, and then it will get better. That's the only time. Just like World War I, you know, something had to happen, right? They had to die. I mean, millions of people had to die before anything was, you know, resolved, unfortunately. So it's sad, but, you know, it just has to get there.
Thanks to your background, some of your best work and your most known work is the work you've done where you chronicle some of the social justice stories and some of these aspects of these particular people, you know, or just like tying into and explaining to kind of someone who's naive about the topic, you know, what's happened with the company, why have they changed this policy, or why have they fired this person. That's some of your best known work. Would you like to live in a world where you were just a journalist, you just covered any old topic on any topic, you could go all over the place? Is there a reason why you have to go down this route? Is this your cause?
I would say it is my calling. I've always been interested in social issues, in cultural topics. So I like it. It's interesting. It's fascinating. Every day is a new adventure for me. I like talking about these issues. I like talking to people. I mean, I'm sure I could do other things, like go to some place and write about local culture or something, like, you know, tourism. But that's not my calling. I don't like doing these things. I prefer political topics, not boring politics, you know, of people in courtrooms or whatever, but rather the day-to-day stuff, the cultural shifts that we're looking at. The big causes. Well, I guess that wouldn't be the day-to-day though, but it all adds up into it, right? It adds up into the whole cultural narrative, and that's what I'm interested in, the media. So I don't really see myself doing much else. I mean, I could, like gaming is fine. That's a passion of mine as well, but I like doing what I do.
Okay,
definitely.
at the end of the interview, do you have like a final message to leave people with, or someone you want to say hello to or thank?
I would say, follow me on Twitter at Still Gray, but beyond that, definitely keep fighting the good fight, because if people don't speak up, and I think it's very important to speak up, then those guys get to control the narrative. And at this point, truth is under attack. Facts are under attack. These people don't really care about the facts. They only care about the narrative. So we have to seize the narrative back and start reclaiming reality. We can't let our reality be taken over by this so-called Ministry of Truth sort of organization, which is what they are. They try to tell you what to think. You can't let other people dictate reality for you. So I think you should speak up and speak out and speak loudly, and don't be afraid, because you have the backing of everyone behind you, whether you know it or not.